start. So today's session, 365 Black, One Community United in Blackness. The topic is I'm not okay, and that's okay too. The wisdom of discomfort. We want to remind you that this information was prepared by our guest facilitator today. The information is not supported or endorsed in any way by SAMHSA, the Department of Health and Human Services, or ANTAC as a whole. Session security, we do not foresee any issues in today's session. However, if any issues arise, if we start to have trouble with the Zoom, we will close this Zoom out and we will send a new link to everyone to rejoin. All right, so a little bit about NTAC. So if you have not joined our mailing list, please make sure that you join. We have a lot of exciting and no cost learning opportunities coming up and on an ongoing basis. So these are a list of the partners under NTAC, and our goal is to make sure that we provide technical assistance and training for child, youth, and family mental health. And these partners help us and support us in doing that, making sure that we are able to address challenges and amplify successes from pregnancy all the way through adulthood and seniors and family members and individuals chosen family. All right, so NTAC celebrates Black brilliance and innovation. I just want to give a shout out to all of my colleagues here on this slide for their support in helping us develop and market and increase awareness around 365 Black. So the vision and services that NTAC provide includes this presentation that you will receive today, but we also have several other presentations. We have technical assistance, individual and group services, peer learning exchanges, customized coaching, and various training academies. Again, our vision is that all children, youth, and families living with and impacted by mental health challenges will have access to the resources and opportunities they need to thrive in a comprehensive and equitable system of care. And you may ask, what does that have to do with our topic today? And as I thought about this prior to our presentation, it has everything to do with it. So as we talk about system of care, it is important for us to understand the challenges and the barriers that people, especially Black and Brown people, experience when they're accessing mental health services. And we can see those challenges and those barriers is evident in the data. We continue to see disparities and disproportionate outcomes among young Black and Brown youth and families. And so I thought about this in terms of going to a doctor, and imagine going to a doctor and saying, you know what, my leg hurts. And before the doctor did any assessment, they say, you know what, I know what that is. Because you're Black, that's diabetes. And we're going to amputate your leg because it's just going to get worse. And then we're going to give you this diet to eat. Like, you would not want to go to that doctor. And so in this session, this is the importance of digging beneath the root to understand what are the barriers, what are the challenges, and how can we get better at serving the people that we serve, that we're not just seeing people and based on their skin tone saying those groups are not interested in mental health, or that I know best of how to fix this, and let me just give you this evidence-based intervention to make life better for you. But we're taking a step back and listening and digging beneath the root to understand what are the barriers, not just for that individual, but generationally. What are the messages that are being shared within that community, and what can we do as providers to disrupt that narrative, not to silence people, but to disrupt it in a way that's productive and effective by doing our own work as individuals and as organizations. All right, some commonly asked questions. After today's session, you will receive a link to a survey. We ask that you take time to complete it. This allows us to share this information with our funder, but also it allows us to hear your thoughts about the session and what things you would like to hear in the future. If you would like to see 365 Black again, put it in your survey. Also, for anyone who is on the call today, you will receive a certificate of completion. If you have joined this session by phone, please email Joanne Bloom to let her know that you were on the training today. All right. So anytime we are talking about disparities, anytime we talk about race and intersectionality, we want to make sure that we are using affirming, respectful, and recovery oriented language in everything that we do. We want to make sure that our language is strength based and hopeful, that it is inclusive and accepting of diverse cultures, genders, perspectives, and experiences. And that's not just across gender and race, but within those things. That just because I'm a Black woman doesn't mean that I believe and think the same way as other Black women, or that I can even relate to everything. And so, giving ourselves space and freedom and inviting different ways of seeing things, but doing it in a way that is healing centered, trauma responsive, and that is inviting to people, to individuals to participate on their own journeys. We also want to make sure that we're using person first language that is free of labels, that our language and our actions are non judgmental, and that we avoid assumptions. And instead, we lean in with a lens of curiosity. That we want to make sure that our language and our actions are respectful, clear, and understandable. And most importantly, our goal is to inspire change. And so we want to make sure the things that we say we believe in, the youth and young adult lives that we say we want to support and improving, that shows up in our actions, that it shows up in the services that we provide, the locations that we provided, the policies and products and services that we offer, that they align with the vision and the goals that we have for that we serve. Right. Further, I am going to introduce this powerhouse for today, Stacey Thompson. I know that you all are going to enjoy it. Stacey always brings the fire, and she has such a unique way of bringing this full circle. How does race and racism and intersectionality come together with the system of care? How does it come together? What does it look like within our organizations, and really digging beneath the root? And so I love Stacey and her presentation. She always stretches us and she always pushes us to be better and to do better. So without further ado, welcome again to today's session. I am not okay, and that's okay too. The wisdom of discomfort, and our phenomenal guest presenter for today, Stacey Thompson, certified peer support specialist, and also the founder and CEO of Equilibrium LLC. Welcome to the stage. Please join me in giving her a virtual round of applause. Welcome, Stacey.
Wow, what an introduction. I that was some introduction. Wow. I hope I live up to that for
You
today.
will.
And so thank you so much. I am here in San Diego, California, which is the land of the E-Pie T-Pie. And so so one of the things that I want to make sure I'm making room for and space for today is discussion. I want to make sure that I'm not trying to squeeze so much information in today that I'm having time to hear perspectives and exploration from other people. And so I'm wanting to make sure that I am letting people know that I want this to be interactive. And so I want people to be giving me feedback in the chat. And also, if you're feeling brave, please unmute yourself and give the feedback when I'm asking for some feedback. And I guess let's just get in there because we have a lot to cover for today. And so first things first. So what Dr. Freeman Foster had said is that I am going to be talking about some things that, well, are going to make us uncomfortable. And so I'm hoping that when you chose to register for a presentation called the wisdom of discomfort, that you came with the expectation that you might be a little uncomfortable for today. So I'm hoping that's what's happening. And so I want you to be able to, kind of keep this in mind, eat the fruit, right? And leave the seeds. So, what is useful for you, take that in, let it nourish you, And if it's something that seems to be getting in the way, go ahead and leave it, because those seeds can nourish somebody else later, right? So, so I just want that to be something that we keep in mind for today when, if you feel anything that might be challenging, and of course, take care of yourself, right, as you see fit. And so if we could go to the next slide, I am going to talk about the learning objectives for today. And so just to also keep these in mind, as I'm, that I might be taking a scenic route to tie these things in, but just keep in mind that I'm going to be covering all of and including all of these particular speaking points for today. And because I am someone who is a peer specialist and someone who is coming from the experience of not just someone who provides services for other people in the mental health arena or behavioral health arena, and it's also that I am a receiver of those services, and I have a history of having being a receiver for those services. So today, what you're going to get is what is the core to and foundational to peer support, which is my lived experience and sharing my lived experience in a way that's going to facilitate discussion of your lived experiences. And so that we can talk about those things. So I want to compare and contrast the definitions of discomfort, injury, and trauma. And the reason I really want to do that is to, because there's been this kind of idea of concept creep where when things that may make us a little uncomfortable, sometimes, and of course this is subjective because everyone defines for themselves what makes them uncomfortable, what has harmed them, or what has been traumatic to them. But just I want to be working from a kind of a shared definition so that we're aware that when what I'm speaking from today is kind of the nuance in these things. And so that's one of the learning objectives for today, exploring the emotional and social value of the right to comfort. And that is an important point for me. Examine examples, and this is where I'm going to ask for the feedback of kind of this oppressive comfort, and I'll be covering that in a few minutes. And the examples of just how in our day-to-day lives, either workplace, school, whatever spaces you find yourself in, where you find these dynamics coming into play. And then, of course, I just couldn't call myself a peer specialist if I didn't talk about mental health recovery and peer support. And so I'm going to be doing that as well. And so if we could go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk about, so today, talking about I'm not okay, and that's okay. That part of, why I named this presentation what I named it, is because when we find ourselves in situations where we're not expressing behavior or emotions, roles that someone else deems to be appropriate or desirable, sometimes, or even if we just find ourselves in situations and emotional issues or physical issues where, we're just not feeling our best. And when people kind of want to push us to feel differently, they want us to feel a way that makes them comfortable, right? And at the cost of our own comfort level, right? And so that's why I named this presentation that I'm not okay, and that's okay too, because especially when I talk about what we're going to be talking about today, it's you're supposed to feel uncomfortable when things are harmful to you. And it's also the idea that explore not only feeling discomfort in order to maintain someone else's comfort level, but the way that we could recognize and explore and grow from our own discomfort. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide. And so this is the first question of the feedback that I'm wanting, and that is, what does it look like to feel comfortable? And so for me, I'm just going to give, a really basic kind of scenario that I think of when I think of my comfort and me being comfortable and feeling great. And so um, I don't know if anyone else has shared this experience, but being out at a park or a beach on a sunny day with a nice breeze, with my blanket laid out, and I have a good book and maybe a little light music in the background or some brown noise going on while I'm reading, and then I doze off and have a nap in the sun. That is such a happy place for me. Oh, that I love that. That is peak comfort for me. And so what I am reading in some of the chat are people's experiences and what it looks like for comfort. Safety. Oh, safety is paramount for comfortability. Yes, absolutely. Um, and so the comfort, the authenticity, being able to feel okay in my own skin. So yes, that's also something. Feeling relaxed, not feeling anxious. Um, Being in a space that is welcoming to my whole self. Exactly. I'm most comfortable when I'm around people and talking and sharing. Yet, oh, I love conversation and interaction. And I'm also someone who likes to spend time by myself. And, oh, a cup of hot tea or coffee in the morning. Yes, I had mine. So being around people who are non-judgmental, not need to code switch. Okay, Nia, because we are definitely going to be circling back around to that specifically. Absolutely. Anything with water and music, yes. And being grounded, being in control. I'm most comfortable when I'm able to be quiet without people making comments. Quiet, I see you, Cassandra. I see you. As a kind of a natural introvert, sometimes I'm in my own bubble of comfort. And sometimes when people come and they want to, and I know sometimes the intent is they're trying to be friendly, they're trying to connect. But when I'm in my comfort bubble, sometimes it's just nice to be there and be quiet and be there for me. But yes, thank you so much for that. And so, and speaking of that, if we go to the next slide, then the question is kind of the flip side of that, then what makes you uncomfortable, right? And so just what I described, what Cassandra was talking about, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. Did I, Cassandra? I was looking at that and I assumed that that's the correct pronunciation. Okay. And so the idea of what makes someone uncomfortable. And sometimes that is when I'm feeling like just, sitting at the park. Sometimes I'm not even reading. Sometimes I'll just be staring off into the distance, just looking at the skyline and, butterflies fluttering and birds flying and just in my own little world. And sometimes when people want to strike up a conversation, when I'm in that quiet moment, that can make me feel really uncomfortable. um, Feelings that I'm not accepted or my ideas. Yeah, Cleveland, yep. My face gets red. I get a massive hot flash. I can start to feel angry depending on the situation, feel judged and anxious. Oh, lots of sound, overstimulation. Renee, I see that too. Yes, that's why I love that brown noise. um, but yes, overstimulation, yes. And so, um, and I think as we see people sharing their experiences, one of the things that really stands out, at least for me, it's something that I can always depend on, is that people's experiences are going to vary, right? That sometimes what might make one person comfortable may make someone else very uncomfortable. And so the and so kind of going back to a shared, so let me kind of back up a bit and go back to some definitions. So if we go to the next slide, I think specifically I'm defining here kind of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about comfort, like, as everyone shared their experiences, but kind of just basic dictionary definition. Comfort, soothe, console, or reassure. That's like a verb action. But it's also comfort, right? It is contentment. Um, so then there's discomfort, which is that absence of comfort, right? Ease, which is also kind of that comfort is ease, being relaxed, right? As some of us were sharing our experiences, those things that make us feel safe. But so discomfort is that uneasiness or it's hardship. Um, Anything that disturbs or interferes with our comfort, even when it's coming, even if or when it's coming from a good place. Um, and sometimes the interfering and disturbing of our comfort um, may come not necessarily because someone's intending to do anything. Sometimes just the natural state of existing and having expectations or kind of placed on us because of how we may present. Um, kind of who we are or who we're perceived to be as an identity. Um, Sometimes those things we talk about the way that, or I'm talking about the way that sometimes, what makes us uncomfortable a lot of the times isn't necessarily coming with an intent or consent, right? And so on the next slide, as I mentioned, I was going to talk about the differences between um, discomfort and injury, harm, and trauma is that for this discussion that I'm kind of, you know, highlighting the nuance. And so, as kind of the definition previously showed, that for discomfort, that can mean a whole range of things, right? Going from simple, the absence of comfort or ease to, pain. It is, so discomfort includes all of that, but it's also kind of implying that it's kind of a low grade, kind of constant, if you will. And so harm and injury is more damage, right? There's an impact. There is something has happened, and then there is an aftermath that is tangible. Um, and so that is, the idea or kind of the contrast between discomfort and injury or harm. And then trauma being it's the idea of there's even an aftermath further for that damage that has been done. That kind of when we're talking about harm or injury, again, for today, the way I'm defining it for today, it may be a little more, again, it's tangible, more identifiable, perhaps, and a little more short term in the recovery sense than a trauma, which can take as long as it needs to take for someone to be in recovery. It's something that, impacts somebody on not just an emotional and mental level, but also on a physical level, a physiological level. And so, I want to make sure that when I'm speaking for today about discomfort and when I do talk about injury and trauma, that really I'm kind of talking about gradations, nuances of this word, of these words for today. And so when I'm talking about, so comfort is a natural state, if you will, or often considered a natural state, right? If it's meant to be transient in nature. It's meant to be temporary. No one's meant to stay in a place of discomfort without expecting relief, right? And so actually, I want to know if anyone has any thoughts around, like, is there agreement or disagreement or added points for the definitions I just gave, or is everyone kind of okay with those things? One triggers the other. Okay. I'm also trying to keep up with the chat while I'm talking. I have to keep reminding myself, look at the chat, because that's where the feedback's coming. Okay, so spot on with that. Thank you, Jennifer. And so let me see if I go back up and see. All right. Okay, I just saw something that really made me feel deeply. Deborah, people insulting my intelligence as a Black woman and trying to take advantage of my skills for their benefit. Absolutely. And that is one of the things that I kind of like, or I'm going to be referring to as a oppressive comfort, in that, that my discomfort, so the cost of maintaining someone else's comfort is oppressive to me, because it is not only taking, and impacting me, but it's at the benefit of someone else, to my detriment. And so when I talk about, and I'm going to talk about, like, when we exploring the emotional value and kind of this right to comfort, we kind of have to start at a place. And again, I'm going to, for you all, define where kind of where my baseline, my starting point is. And that is acknowledging, looking at history, and particularly legislative history, constitutional history, in order to look at the evidence of kind of which cultures need to look for, need to expect protection, or needed to petition for protection in order to be able to exist and coexist in spaces with other people. And so when you look at kind of the Civil Rights Act, and you're looking at the protected classes of people that were originally intended for the Civil Rights Act, you see that race, color, religion, national origin. So you are already understanding, just from this legislation, that people were being discriminated against because of race, right? So that had to mean that there is a default in order for there to be people who, again, need to be protected from this discrimination. Color, right? There has to be a default in order for people to be discriminated against for not being that default. So religion, national origin. So when we talk about the kind of this right to comfort and the power dynamics, quite often we're talking about the, and what I'm talking about today, again, is the power dynamic between that quote unquote default or dominant culture of of a religious standard, of a national standard, a race color standard. And so what I'm talking about here specifically, we're going to see on the next slide. And that would be, so, when we're talking about the issue of race, color, religion, national origin, and also, I'm sorry, I left out sex or gender, and that was, and actually it's ironic that I left that out, because that also got left out when they initially proposed the bill. And they had to afterwards separately go, the women's group going, wait a minute, you didn't put anything about in there about discriminating against women. And so, they kind of threw that in there thinking that, well, since nobody wants to really support women, if we like kind of slide it in and tack it onto this, maybe people will vote against it. So this is like one of those ideas where they were trying to, another example of using intersectionality in order to try to gain try to weaponize people's biases in order to carry out their racism. So anyway, so when we're talking about kind of the default culture of this here United States, we are talking about white supremacy culture. And so I want to be clear that when we talk about white supremacy culture, we are definitely talking about a social construct with some very real impact, tangible, measurable impact. But we're talking about a, a philosophy, really, an ideology where in order to benefit from the advantages of protections of this identity called whiteness, there's a cost that you are also taking in. So even here, talking about this idea, from the start when we're talking about the creation of race, that people here are going, okay, to maintain the comfort level of the benefits of what we will get, as identifying as white, we will have to leave out and kind of assimilate our culture, assimilate our religion, our language, try to appear white adjacent, passing, or kind of be hyper aware of color and how that plays into the dynamics. But this, all of these things that in order to be able to identify yourself as white, that these, this is the discomfort that you're needing to take on. And so is this anyone's like, has anyone heard of this before? I know I need to ask because I know some people, really get uncomfortable talking about white supremacy culture. And thank you, Yvonne. I see for the people discriminating within our own race, that is literally still white supremacy is, so the idea that white supremacy is a hierarchical structure, a caste system, if you will, based on race and color, and socioeconomic background. So when people are being racist, which you don't have to be white to be racist, right? And you don't have to be white to uphold white supremacy culture. It's especially if there's an element of comfort or privilege that you are getting from aligning yourself with those ideals. And so the ideals, that are here are just, I know that there are times when it's like they're updating kind of this idea and adding more kind of characteristics. And by the way, these characteristics are not in and of themselves bad. It's not what we're saying. It's not what I'm saying, but it's more that when you see kind of the prioritization of some of these characteristics, again, to the detriment or discomfort of other people, right? And so the either or binary, seeing things in terms of black and white, ironically, individualism. Oh, actually, I just saw something too that I wanted to make sure I said, and that was, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name, but I did catch your comment when you're saying about people with disabilities also weren't included in that. Also, queer people were not included in that, and frighteningly, even till today, I mean, gender and sexual orientation were only added as an executive order from President Obama. We still actually do not formally have protections from discrimination in the workplace for. It's the EEOC, that's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They make decisions that kind of interpret that sex covers people's sexual orientation and transgender people, but also but we don't have formal protection. But yeah, and people with disabilities also, we had to lobby for special protections from us because again, we were being discriminated against, still are being discriminated against. But just again, that also is significantly part of the dominant culture as well, is that ableism as well. So thank you to, and I didn't catch the name, but again, the person who made sure to highlight that for me. And so with these various characteristics of white supremacy culture that we talk about, one of the most significant for this conversation today is that right to comfort. Now, I want to ask, and I want some feedback here, is so what do you think that might look like in your spaces? What does that look like in your spaces? What does right to comfort mean to you? What do you think that, how does that manifest? So I'm seeing reading in here.
And we have a hand raised. I'm not sure if you want to
Oh,
I see it
absolutely.
put down.
Yes, please. Unmute that person.
Hi,
Is
my
it
name is
Philippia?
Philippa. Hi
Philippa.
everyone.
Sorry about that.
Just before this session, I read a headline that said a European judge wants to change the rules because Simone Biles is winning too much. And it just made me think of all of the examples that we experience, comparable examples in our day to day where, you know, we are, we might be doing our best on our job, working real hard and working in our gifting, and it makes someone else feel insecure and they want to not feel less than. And so they want to, um, shift the weights in their favor. Uh, and it's something that all of those groups that you talked about, have had to struggle with, excel in spite of, work twice as hard to get half as, we've all heard, those lessons that maybe our parents or elders have taught us about how do you function in a world that may not be comfortable with you just being your authentic best self. Um, I read another article yesterday about a young gentleman who is autistic and was class valedictorian, had a 4.2 GPA. And, I would love to just kind of hear his story and speak with him about what it was like and the perceptions that we have of differently able people, and the labels that we put on people to limit them. Um, but those were just some things that came to mind.
Thank you, Philippa. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting at. And I just see something also in the chat from Erica talking about the right to comfort means that I should be able to expect that I will feel comfortable in any situation I'm in because my unique views and experiences will be accepted. And so kind of what Philippa was alluding to in that, where there is a kind of dominant culture or a culture that has the advantages, social economical or social economic power, if you will, that dominant culture, that's the power dynamic that allows for for the comfort level of those those in that particular class being prioritized over the people in the marginalized class, so that we're expected to change behavior, perform behavior in order to maintain a level of comfort, and even kind of contributing to that self-identity, right? We don't want to exhibit behavior that is undesirable, because another thing that that I wanted to make sure I hit on that point about what we think of, the things that make us uncomfortable and things that can make other people uncomfortable. And a lot of times that can be just simply not aligning your behavior with what's expected, aligning your behavior in ways that might be challenging for other people. And again, that idea of sometimes, going back to the definition even of discomfort, it's just something that just I'm uneasy with, right? Something that makes people uneasy, and some of that uneasiness can be insecurity. It could be jealousy. It could simply be, questioning your own identity and choices. What that idea of, I shouldn't have to, is that right to comfort bit? And I am going back to the chat real quick just to make sure I'm looking at some of these. I shouldn't have to shrink myself in the room for what I work to achieve just because someone else in the room has not chosen to do the inner work for their own sake. Absolutely. Defensiveness. I'm tired of holding my tough to inequality and okay. Inequality and feeling like I'm on a plantation, and experience supervisors, directors, insecure and trying to make me accountable to their lack of skills. Absolutely. It shows up in so many ways. We must openly understand that we are not always going to be accepted, but we must keep it moving in spite, to the best of our ability. And Yvonne, speaking to that is exactly kind of that duality of maintaining comfort, and kind of being expected to maintain a comfort level for other people, especially if it requires kind of a reframing or performance of your own that might be detrimental to your own comfort level. And when that becomes an expectation, the way that it impacts us is really what can move that discomfort to harm, not simple discomfort, but okay, so now there has been injury and damage that has been done, and possibly depending on how many times it happens, the severity that in your perception, your own insight, what how that might be traumatic to you in the long run, how it affects you in the long run, how it changes your behavior, changes your choices, changes the way you move through and navigate your spaces in your world because of the experiences have created a feeling with you that is not only just simple discomfort, it's the the ways and the depths to which it affects you and impacts you. I'll talk about that a little in depth later.
And we had Angela with her hand up.
Oh, okay. Yes, unmute it.
Yes, you had already was speaking about what I was about to say, because most of the time that your grandmother used to tell you you're seen, not heard, and then they raise it to their parents, and then their parents tell them the same thing. So when you in a room, they feel like that you should be sitting in a corner somewhere, and so that's how you be feeling when you come out into work in the world, that you in a corner and you should be seen, not heard. And when now you wants to be seen and heard, your voice is invalid because it never was heard from the beginning.
Oh, Thank you. Oh, Angela is dropping some gems. Thank you for that. Um, I mean, wow, I couldn't have said it better. It's absolutely that is part of the harm, actually, right? Because it you know, the harm is multi-level. It comes from, you know, a variety of directions of this message that um, you know, this is just the expectation. This is what you're expected to do. And that when you don't fulfill that expectation, right, you're made to feel like something's wrong, right? You're not doing something you're supposed to be doing. And you're not living up to, you know, what you're supposed to um, you know, what your end of this, you know, social contract is. And that can be, you know, very traumatic, you know, just coming from the point of shaping your family experiences, because your first set of experiences are going to be within your own culture, within your own family. And so taking those dynamics and understanding that for Black people, our family dynamics are shaped by, you know, residue of slavery and trauma. And so some of that is going to be what we're carrying into our spaces, and then dealing with kind of those kind of outside factors that reinforce you know, the ideals around that. That can be, you know, that can be cumulatively traumatic. Okay, and so if we go to the next slide, um, specifically, I really want to talk about this, the power dynamics of the right to comfort, because it's kind of the underlying and the underlying ideals that are concepts that are built into this the power dynamic, right? The right to comfort is coming you know, at the benefit of people who are disadvantaged. And so whether we are talking about Black community feel in and you know, Black and brown communities feeling you know, causing discomfort and feeling discomfort for people identifying as white, or whether it's, you know, we're talking gender and, you know, kind of women can also feel uncomfortable or being made to feel uncomfortable being around this male discomfort, this patriarchy, misogyny, genderism, or, you know, the idea of femininity in and of itself that is at the core of homophobia, right? Or even within the Black community, the comfort level that, or the level of discomfort that some of us may feel when considering some of us who are in the queer community, because, you know, so here I'm talking about the ways in which different communities, different groups, and particularly when I'm talking about Black people and Black men, Black straight people, I'm talking specifically about how even as oppressed people, that because of the hierarchy I mentioned before, right? It's the that power hierarchy that is established that actually takes into consideration all of these things, color, gender, you know, ability, you know, economic background, all of these things. And so how that can feel and you know, the ideas that are bred out of that or reinforced out of that. So sometimes it can look like that conditioned superiority, bias, fear, right? And so I'm wanting us as Black people to think about and consider that the ways in which we feel that when we're in predominantly white spaces, and as Black people feeling like that, that these power dynamics are at play that are affecting and relieving us, if you will, of our right to comfort. But also how as Black people, that sometimes we overlook how diverse our own community is. We're not a monolith, and how within Black representation, we also have feminists and womanists, right? We have queer Black people. We have Black people who have disabilities. We even have Black people who are not from the United States, right? Who are going to come under the umbrella of Blackness. We have Black people who don't speak English, right? Who, as a native language. And so all the ways in which sometimes we may not be aware of, in contrast, how some of these things we also experience as an oppressor, an oppressed oppressor, right? So the conditioned superiority, bias, and fear, right? Normalizing, overlooking, and or defending people, organizations, and systems that historically have committed acts of oppression. When you have the power to be able to sanitize your environment from the things that make you uncomfortable, right? That's that power dynamic, and how that impacts that right to comfort directly impacts, and that it's how we're losing pieces of ourselves, or we're being denied things in order to maintain comfort level for other people. Hold on, let me make sure I'm going back to the we must learn to better love ourselves and others in illustration and clap. Yes, yes.
We have Rose Ivani.
Okay.
Rose
Right.
Evie. Yes, that's fine.
Say that again, Ivani.
Rose Evie is French.
Ivani.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. I wanted to go back to when you were talking about being understanding that us as Black people, that it's not just like African Americans, but there's also other people. I'm speaking because I'm from Haiti, right? And I have to get it from like growing up, I got it from like I say African Americans because that's what I know, right? I get it from African Americans, and then I get it from the white people. And it's like either it's like I'm not I'm not white enough, of course, right? Um, or I don't understand the culture of Black Americans, you know what I mean? And growing up, it was kind of hard because I'm like, I'm just here trying to get my education. Like this was like in school, right? And they would say like, I've heard things of like, did you come here on a plane? Or like it was like crazy things. So I'm like trying to understand like how sometimes people don't understand there are different people within Black people, and just to respect them, you know what I mean? Even though like I may not have an accent, right? But still I have family members who have accents, and I see how they're treated because they have an accent. And it doesn't make them dumb because they have an accent. It's just an accent, you know? And so I get a lot of sometimes like when my mother speaks, um, they'll look at her like she doesn't know what she's talking about. And I'm like, you understand clearly what she said, but because she has an accent, you're going to make it seem like she doesn't know what she's talking about.
Many times I would have to call for my mom because once they hear an accent, they act like she doesn't know. So, and that's with like white people and also Black Americans as well. Um, and I try to explain to people like we're different. You know, although I grew up around a lot of Black Americans because I went to school with a lot of Black Americans, but it's like they still don't quite understand when Haitians growing up, our parents are very strict when it comes to education, and we really have to get that. You know, we can't be outside hanging around and doing all that stuff. So it was different growing up because they were like, well, you're Black. So I see that you're Black. Why can't you do what we're doing? Because I'm like, my culture is different from your culture. But I respect you guys. And all I ask is for you guys to respect me. I'm sorry, I was long-winded. Thank you so much for sharing that, because that illustrates very much, you know, the lived experience of what I'm talking about. Um, it's it's the ways in which we have all been conditioned, indoctrinated, and have expectations of maintaining, perpetuating a system of a hierarchical class, right? That's based on, those, the dominant culture that required legislation for protection, right? So the ways in which white supremacy culture is rigid and defines the way the hierarchy works. And so in that way, if we are kind of aligning ourselves or our ideals with that hierarchy, that is perpetuating white supremacy, that is perpetuating racism, right? So even when it's Black on Black, right, which there's no such thing as Black on Black crime, by the way, crime, right? But this is me talking about the ways in which so often we can get a distorted view of what it looks like to to adhere to white supremacy culture or to be racist when it's kind of, some people have this idea that there's even a such thing as reverse racism, which again, no, racism is racism, and it's hierarchical, and yet it's not the only power system in play, but the overall idea of whiteness includes so many different intersections of what those power dynamics and systems are. And so just kind of going back, thank you all for, oh, wait, I did see something. I'm sorry,
I was
Lolita.
going to say it's something in the chat. Yes.
Yeah, I saw Lolita. She had mentioned about a question about trauma. If people asking them to repeat themselves over and over, oh wait, something.
I think there's one before that. Do you believe that being able to move and do something to protect oneself is a critical factor in determining whether or not a horrible experience will leave long-lasting scars, or can explain why two people can experience the same tragedy but respond differently?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, because and so even though I'm not necessarily going to get into that today, but I might touch on it really quick. But one of the presentations that I will be doing and recording and putting on my website will talk about the ways in which we discuss trauma and recovery from trauma. One of the most significant ideas for treating trauma is choice, and that is being able to move in safety. Those are things that are significant to overcoming trauma. And so yeah, absolutely, that impacts the way somebody is able to, how long that trauma may, and how severely that trauma may impact them. Absolutely. Thank you. That was a good question. Thank you, Lolita. I'm glad I made sure I saw that. And so also just to go back to the ideas of those power dynamics, it is also benefiting from practices, privileges, and protections gained from the fight against and or harm to people with less social standing, often without giving acknowledgement or credit, right? So as Black people, and because that is, the audience for today, and in that, this is kind of talking about centering Blackness, but also, right, any marginalized community understands that part. When, but specifically Black people, we know what it feels like to see other people benefiting from the things that, from the fights we've had to endure, the harm that we've endured. And even when it was endured by people who came before us, those, those adaptations, those survival adaptations, those trauma adaptations are passed on, and they still live on now in people who, are again, without giving any acknowledgement or credit of, how we've experienced that, how it impacts us, again, in tangible and measurable ways. But that right to comfort bit is, we're expected to pretend like that's okay, right? We're expected to pretend like, and when we hear so much rhetoric about, oh, well, this country isn't a racist country. It was never a racist country. Or when we talk about being post-racial, or these ideas that, or the discussion around reparations. Oh, well, that was so long ago. As though we don't have people still alive today who endured, the Jim Crow South, who didn't endure, the denial of our civil rights, our being unprotected in a place that wasn't designed for our autonomy, our autonomy, and not designed for our humanity, right? Oh, hey, make sure I'm also looking at the chat. And okay, so and then that dominant members are then allowed to, bestow allowances based on what they deem to be normal behavior, right? And then limiting opportunities for people that they deem to be others. And so as I'm talking about Black people being in contrast to the right to comfort as an element of white supremacy culture, I'm also asking us as Black people to stretch ourselves to look at how we may be exhibiting these things when it comes to the other elements of Blackness within our own culture. Is this how we're behaving towards people who don't practice the same religion we practice? If they're not Baptist Christian, are they demonic? Things of that nature. Or if they're not, or if they're Muslim, are they suspicious? How are we treating people who don't adhere to what we have grown accustomed to, that idea of comfort, the culture that we've had to build for ourselves, right? How does that relate to other people? And so, and particularly, again, because one of the reasons why I even asked to do a presentation in June, Pride Month, because I'm somebody who identifies as queer. I'm gender fluid, bi, and pronouns. I'm not tethered to my gender, or my gender expression. So just however I present to you, I'm comfortable with that. But I really want us to think about the ways in which we treat people that we've deemed or we've been led to believe are other, right? That they don't have room or space within our culture, or we don't really kind of think about it. That we don't have to think about it, which is a bit of a privilege, right? And then, of course, that social identity being used to explain differences in outcomes, effort, or ability. So that idea of ignoring kind of systemic issues and weaponizing, the bias and assumptions about identities that we're unfamiliar with, that we're uncomfortable with, and attributing attributing those differences to that. Like, as Black people, we know what this feels like. And likewise, can we stretch ourselves to understand when we do this to our own people, we are literally upholding white supremacy. When we do that, we're shadowing white supremacy. And so if we are heading towards an all-inclusive Blackness, and we need to explore that right to comfort that we are feeling when someone else is disturbing our comfort with their existence or with their voice. I'm going to go back to the chat, make sure I didn't miss something significant.
It's on fire out here.
Right.
I think you responded to a lot of the questions that were in the chat. And I just wanted to double click on something you said about being mindful of how we treat people that we deem to be the other, and thinking about it around being mindful to being labeled as other, that we would push somebody else out there and like, no, I'm not the other, they are, and just being mindful of how that shows up. And I think a lot of the comments that I've seen in the chat kind of correspond to those power dynamics that you were speaking of.
Thank you so much. Okay. And so, which takes us to and thank you for that segue, actually, because takes us to the next slide, which, in terms of being othered, right? In terms of a performance of conformity, assimilating, and that is code switching. So I know that the audience I'm speaking to today is very aware of what code switching is, how that impacts, right? It's those unspoken rules and expectations of culture based on what a dominant group believes is appropriate. And it is a performance. Because, a lot of times, we have conversations around code switching that is mostly centered and focused on language, right? Not the way we speak, our tone, our pitch, how sometimes you have to remove a little bass out of your voice if, unless someone thinks that you're frightening and that take that tone to be, they're feeling threatened by it. And so, okay, I have to be aware of that. I have to be aware of my word choice. Some of the, other ideas of, the perception of mood. I lost the name already, but earlier in the presentation, someone was talking about the comfort of being able to sit and be quiet without people messing with you about being quiet. And that is part of code switching. How, the idea that how many times have have any of us been at work in a neutral mood because maybe we're sitting here thinking about what we're gonna have for lunch, or oh my gosh, what time am I supposed to be picking up the kids? Like, oh, did I call those people today? And someone is like, oh, what's wrong? You're just not your chatty self, or you're not, you don't seem, is something wrong? And you're just like, no, I'm okay. I'm just existing. I don't need to be upbeat and chatty and smiling all the time, because sometimes my peace is on the inside. But sometimes I'm holding my peace on the inside. It's the way that we have to be hyper aware of our mannerisms. Even our attire, our appearance is code switching. Even for me today, for a minute before I signed on, I was like, oh my gosh, should I take out my septum ring? I'm like, like, is that going to be upsetting for some people? And I'm like, you know what? Look, what kind of representation am I giving if I am not coming with my whole self, if we're going to have that conversation, right? And so, and also hairstyles, because a hairstyle, we know, especially if you are a female identifying or femme Black woman, you understand. And I'm speaking to that experience because I don't know what the experience of being a Black male is. So, but I am sure that there is some, hyper visibility happening for Black men as well. And frankly, I would love it if there is someone, a Black male out there who would love to share his experience with any of these things. I would love to have that. But yes, the way that the Black femmes and females are meant to even think about how our hair looks and what earrings we're wearing, and how big and chunky and bright is our jewelry, you know. And so, the ways that code switching and this idea of what is appropriate, to have people, so that people are not only kind of maintaining comfort for other people, but also to low-key maintain comfort for ourselves, because I don't want to have to explain this. I don't want to have this conversation. I don't want to have to answer these questions about how long it takes me to do my hair, or having conversations about whatever the latest news that happens, that happened, some tragedy that happened in the Black community, and then wanting people, people coming to me want my take on it, as a spokesperson apparently. But sometimes I'm just, can I just exist in my bubble? Okay, and so, and people are people. Is that a Depeche Mode fan? People are people. Okay, I'm sorry. And so I also want people. Okay, yes, I'm seeing things in the chat about around the code switching. Is anyone wanting? Is there a hand up anywhere? Someone wanting to share? Because I would love that. Oh, okay.
Rose's hand is up.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you. This is interactive, by the way. And I don't really talk that much, but this is cool. And I love code switching a lot. Because it's fun. I'm gonna be honest, code switching is fun. Um, and especially, like, I know, like, I work in for the county where I am, and there are certain ways you have to talk. Yeah, you have to speak. And even where I live now, when I meet people, it'll be white people, because there's a lot of white people here. And so I have ways of speaking. But when I'm around my friends and when I'm around my family, it's a whole different ball game. I'll tell you, like, where I get my locks done. I'll tell you, like, where, your nails look good. And there's sometimes I kind of forget, because it's not that I forget, but if I see someone who don't look like me, but their outfit is nice, I'm gonna be like, girl, you look great.
You know what I mean? And so that's just how it is. And I remember working with kids, you know, different ethnicity type children, like doing therapy. And they would say, one girl said to me, well, she rather speaks, she doesn't want to speak proper because it makes her sound white. And I'm like, I said to her, I said, don't you ever say that. Because what you're doing is you're downplaying you as a Black person. You're saying that you are not educated enough to speak proper. It's not the white person who's educated. That sounds like that. It's just, you're just educated to speak. That's how people who are educated speak, or who have proper grammar speak. You can't tie it to a white person, but I guess it's because of what she's heard in the past. And this has happened to me too, where people have said, "Oh, well, you know, you don't sound like you from the hood." I'm like, oh, okay, it wait a little longer, but there's a time and place for it, you know. So I love it all. I love code switching, especially hairstyles. I listen.
Well, I appreciate that, Rose. I appreciate you sharing.
Thank you.
Hold on. I appreciate you sharing your perspective. And because I really was about to go in on, you know, how exhausting it can be for me and for some people to code switch. And so I really appreciate you sharing a different view of that. And yet, and would like to, you know, kind of um, explore or broaden the idea of what's, you know, allowed in a time and a place for, you know, who gets to decide what's appropriate for that time and that space of, you know, how this speech should be given, provided. Is it something you can understand? Am I being clear? Then perhaps a varied way of speaking, a different dialect, different accents, different, you know, just different linguistics, even just, you know, how it can come into play. And that if we are, you know, talking about the ways in which, you know, sometimes, you know, that looking at comfort and discomfort, um, kind of challenging someone, or, you know, anyone who might have that experience of kind of thinking about um you know, the times and places for certain types of communication, that why we are why do we feel that comfortable with that idea? Like, what is it that might make us uncomfortable about someone speaking differently in that area? What, um, okay, so I see the time ticking, but yeah, I like, you know, I like the idea of that, the idea of just, you know, examining that. As for me, um, so and again, I really appreciate you know, that perspective, because one of the things that I was going to go in on is about again, the performance, right? Because it's a role that you're filling in anyone who may have a background in theater, or just liking to perform, and you know that when you are putting on a performance, you are looking at all the details, right? All of the details. And this is someone coming from a queer background, right? When we're even talking about drag. And for me, you know, there are times, and I share this with some of my friends, my straight cis friends, you know, just like, well, sometimes when I'm putting on makeup and earrings, I feel like I'm dressed in drag. Like I'm here with you today feeling like, okay, I'm wearing drag,
but because, you know, for some people, they're looking at me going, well, I mean, clearly you are a woman, you are clearly a female, so this is what we expect of you, without understanding, well, as someone who's, you know, gender fluid, this isn't my normal presentation. This isn't baseline for me. This isn't comfortable for me all the time. But this is what, again, what I really appreciate about what Rose said. Sometimes I do want to play dress up, right? Sometimes I do want to perform. And so again, I really do appreciate that. But also the idea that sometimes performance is something that takes its toll, because it is something that encompasses every part of you, and you have to be aware of it, you know, especially if you're trying to do a good performance, right? You don't want to be clockable, right? You don't want somebody, and whether it's you, you know, kind of code switching your words, your language, or your hairstyle, you don't want it to be clockable. You want to, because the idea here is that we're all passing. Because when you have to perform a role or an identity for someone else's comfort so that they feel safe, or they see you as non-threatening, or they don't see you as someone who's a stereotype, they see you as a human, you know, sometimes it, you know, that it requires, you know, the passing. We are playing a role for you to be able to see me as this, right? And so that can take its toll. And that toll is emotional tax. That's just one of the tolls. But if we go to the next slide here. And so this is, I mean, I hope that some of you are familiar with the idea of emotional tax. And actually, I can ask, but I also see that, ooh, the time. But so the idea of, you know, the ways in which having to perform a role with, you know, the idea that, you know, the performance, and especially the performance when we may not be feeling up to performing, or when it's you know, all day. I mean, it's going to be at least for 8 hours if you go into work, right? For, you know, 3-4 hours if you're at school. I mean, it depends. You're being expected to put on this performance for a long time. And so what are some of the situations and interactions you find yourself in these situations, right? When you know that, and this is the significant part of this, is how often these rules are unspoken, which is so unfair, so unfair to, and so gaslighty, really, to have rules that, you know, they're unwritten, but the expectation is that we're going to follow them. And so how is it that you're supposed to understand what's expected if you're not going to articulate it for me, right? And you're going to wait until I've crossed the line, or crossed that boundary, that undelineated, unspoken boundary, before I hear that, oh, I made someone uncomfortable, right? And so and making someone uncomfortable in me being me, and me existing in my own skin. And so how in these situations it can cause this emotional tax, which is a combination of being on guard against the bias, whether it's intentional or unintentional. That's because of, again, those protected classes I was talking about. And, you know, when we're performing race, when we're performing gender, performing sexual orientation, because if you think, as I mentioned, if there are no formal protections for LGBTQIA plus people in the workplace, and so there are people who still, in spite of this being Pride 2024, there are people who are having to code switch and trying to pass a straight, so people don't start unconsciously or subconsciously expressing bias against them, maybe being passed over for promotions, or, you know, the way that these things happen. the bracing for insults when people, especially when you're passing, when the idea is, well, if these people aren't in the room, right, then we can say insulting things about them, is one of the things that is that kind of backlash, or almost, the results of performing in a role as though, in order to pass, right, to assimilate, is that, okay, well, I'm not like those people. And so, it's the idea that, this may be one of the ways that comes out is, oh, again, how many people have heard, oh, girl, I mean, I'm not talking about you, if we're talking about, oh, I don't know why some Black women, I don't understand why Black women, oh, girl, not you. and how that can work, or when people who are queer, if you hear people being disdainful of queer issues and then going, oh, but you cool though, you're cool, I'm not talking about you, just the others, right? And so that, or the way we have to avoid being in certain situations and places and around certain people, because especially in places where you can't control who's going to be sharing that space with you, and so you can't control what's going to come out of someone else's mouth. And we also know you can't litigate and legislate what's going to come out of somebody's mouth either. We all know this. This is why, the overturning of affirmative action is so troubling, right? It's because, just because you have a process, or just because there isn't a defined process, doesn't mean that, bias doesn't live in people, and that, can't do anything about that. So what can I do? Avoid being around this person, avoid going into the break room, because that's where people go and let loose with a lot of really uncomfortable and degrading, opinions, ideas, things that can be hurtful to other people when they don't realize they're in the room. Being dismissed, overlooked, disrespected, exclusionary behaviors, and sometimes you're not even aware of those things. And again, I think about people with disabilities specifically, when sometimes when people are planning for office getaways, luncheons, or a retreat, and people might not take into consideration the special, particular abilities that people might be having challenges with. And so those, so having to deal with that, having to be on the receiving end of that. And of course, again, like I just mentioned, changing your appearance, code switching, all that. And so the ways in which, and again, even if we do enjoy the performance or enjoy the code switching, I know sometimes for me, I don't know if this is just me, but sometimes part of my code switching is, when if someone who I think may not share a similar background, a community background with me, and they're trying to speak to me in language that they think is mine, whether it's trying to speak slang and being like, oh, what's up with that Kendrick Lamar? And I'm like, honey, I am 50. Okay. Kendrick Lamar is dope, but that's not really on my rotation the way some of my other music is, right? I'm older, right? So it's the ways in which I have to let constantly letting people know, just hey, this is kind of what my identity is. Oh, okay. So then, and so the impact, the long-term impact, like when we're talking injury and trauma, because, we're talking about, at least me, I'm talking about the ways in which, extended exposure, overwhelming exposure, overwhelming activity in trying to perform a role can be detrimental to your own psyche and your own identity, and who you even know who to come up as, who am I showing up as, and so, how can these things even be reflected in our emotional and mental well-being? It can look like anxiety and panic attacks, depression, irritability, frustration. And so for me too, this is another part of, and when I talk about recovery and peer support, what's going to make this really significant is the way in which when we talk about behavioral health and mental health, how even the way that we designate behavior as inappropriate or undesirable falls under the umbrella of how we interpret culture, right? If someone is has a cultural background where it may not be appropriate in their culture to show sadness, to cry, to show their depression in being heartbroken, because in some of that community, the survival mechanism was anger. It's that survival. And so you have to be able to see and recognize that if someone is showing a sign or symptom, I hate that word symptom, but a sign where you interpret that to be something that's inappropriate, or even wanting to pathologize it, are you looking at it through the lens of that person's unique identity, their culture, their community? It's extremely important to think about those things. And I also wanted to make sure I stuck in there that the feeling constant pressure to overwork. Because again, going back to the idea of performance, right? Because sometimes it's not even just about the other spaces that we're in. It's sometimes for people, it could be about the different masks that we have to wear, especially if, within our own communities, as I spoke to earlier, you may have additional identities and intersections that even amongst your own people, where you might be able to relax certain elements of your personality, I still can't be my full self, right? I can sit here and tell my people how, I give myself a pep talk every morning. I have to do that. And people will be like, oh my God, you're talking to yourself. Oh, that's something that crazy people do, right? Not even being aware that, hey, people who have feeling drained and tired, they have to draw inspiration and draw energy from all types of sources. And so it's the way in which we may feel like in every space that we might still have to be looking to censor a part of ourselves in order to maintain comfort for someone else. Okay, and so from that, and I want to stop again, ask for any feedback, or I'm gonna try to go back to the chat real quick and make sure there are a lot. Oh, where can I find peace, girl? And so I'm sorry, I didn't. So for me, when I do say that, for me, girl is an exclamation. I'm not necessarily gendering anybody. That's just, it's for me, it is a figure of speech. And so sometimes it's gotten me in trouble for people who do not identify or clearly identify as someone other than a female, other than woman, can be real challenged with that. But no, it's more or less kind of me expressing a comfort level with sharing with you.
And we have 2 hands raised.
Oh, okay. And then is there anyone who you might recognize hasn't had before? Oh, how about
Yes, Naisha.
Naisha? Okay.
Naisha, Long I. Thank you so much. What I was saying, looking at this and hearing the conversations as we were talking about, kind of code switching, fitting in, kind of downplaying ourselves when it comes to making other people comfortable. I think what it did is it took me back to the beginning of the conversation when we was talking about our own comfortability, and we were talking about, what makes us feel comfortable and discomfort. And in that, reading through the chat, nobody said anything about what makes them feel comfortable is making sure everybody around them is comfortable. And I think that is something to kind of look at when because we did talk about code switching, and then the other person got on and they were talking about their accent. So when you start thinking about people's accent, and we were in the chat kind of talking about, what does, sometimes you do that, and what is proper and what is improper. And I think it takes us back. So when you're looking and thinking about, us as Americans, or hyphenated Americans, and you have the colonized perspective, and it's kind of trying to decolonize those things. And sometimes we don't even realize that the things that we're doing perpetuates those kind of things that were done to us. And we've carried those things on. So when you talk about changing or what is proper and what is improper, I think you have to kind of figure out what the ruler of that is. Like, what are we measuring that by? And as we, everybody went to a school at some point, that's online, and what are those standards? And then to understand that a standard is only the lower, that's the bottom and the base. It's not the ceiling. So when you get into that, and when the lady was talking about the accent, I'm thinking, and that's proper, and what does that, who said that needs to look some other way than what it is? So I think it's very vague in the standards that we set for ourselves. And to truly have acceptance, I think it's everyone is able to show up the way that they are. And when you look at a puzzle, you have 500 pieces, and not each one is going to fit into that particular space, but it fits somewhere in the puzzle. And having that understanding with yourself and your identity that this is a puzzle piece. I don't fit here, but there is a place for me inside of the entirety of the puzzle. But this one doesn't have to be it, and not just hanging up on there. So I was just wanting to go back to the comments that I was saying. It's okay, but I think this is very important, because then you never learn who you are, and we are the teachers of how to treat us. So once we get comfortable in altering our true self, other people start to do that too, and they take ownership of who we are. And working with kids, I tell them, I call you by what you answer to. So if you're going to answer to them, I'm not answering to someone else's name. You're going to call me what it is that I desire to be called, or my preferred name, and that's going to be the only name I answer to. So when it comes to like acting like, or somebody else did, or they told me, that's a sense of giving away control of what we actually can control. So I can control how I show up, who I show up amongst, and it doesn't have to be everyone. So I just wanted to kind of talk through, my explanation and comment in the chat, and give a little feedback too. I love the fact that you brought up it tears down our mental health. And we sometimes can be complacent with that, because we don't tend to ourselves as much as we tend to the world.
Absolutely. Thank you. Ooh, thank you for that. And Naisha also dropping gems. Thank you for that. Seriously, that, I love what you were talking about, because that is, that idea of how are we looking at, and how are we interacting with the environment, the elements that make us uncomfortable. And so for me, that brings into, so when I talked about why I titled this presentation "I'm Not Okay and That's Okay," right? But also the idea of the wisdom of discomfort is that, the exploration of why that exists, giving time and space to that. And actually, you know what? Actually, that is a segue to the principles of recovery that I'm going to talk about. And so I'm going to do kind of like a quick, fast hurry because I see about like we got about 20 minutes and there are a lot to get through. But to be honest, I don't feel the need to go through each and every single one. Well, I mean, I'm going to read them all, but just I'm not going to go do a deep dive on each one. And I think some of them are self-explanatory, but so the idea of the principles of recovery, and this is as it relates to peer support specialist, ethics and boundaries, kind of our training, and on mental health recovery. And so this is also kind of my adaptation of those SAMHSA approved uh, ideas of recovery principles. And so the idea of questioning for me is so incredibly important because it's the way in which we, how are we even going to make sense of like Aisha was saying, who we are, because we spend so much time um, with our comfort being defined by making other people comfort to the point of not really knowing what my identity is. And that is a significant part of mental health recovery. And so, all the questions, not just one question, but all the questions of, why, who am I? Why am I? How do I know what I know? How did I learn what I know? What are my biases? Because we all have them. What are my blind spots? Because we all have them. Looking at your intersections and how they and other culture, because culture isn't just about race, and culture isn't just defined by those protected classes, right? I am somebody who is an avid cinephile. I love movies, and that is a whole culture. There are meetup groups around that. There is language around that. There is a supportive culture around that. And so, so there are in all the ways that we interact with other people, have history, have that history impact our behaviors and our choices. And so all those questions is really significant in mental health recovery. And so it's really important to and again, kind of there is no one place to begin or end with all these principles. You could be doing all at once. Some of these things have a domino effect or overlapping effect, so they're not in any particular order. It's individualized, so it's unique to every person. Choice. Now, I spoke earlier about and I think it was Lolita who's asking the question about how kind of that autonomy and and allows for people to work through their trauma in ways, and it's a significant part of trauma recovery. And so for mental health recovery, so for today, I'm going to say it like this, because some of my ideas around the idea of mental health, mental illness can push people, again, make them really uncomfortable, in the sense that I think, and this kind of goes with the idea of concept creep, how sometimes there's this idea of pathologizing and psychiatrizing, is that a word? Of putting a psychiatric label on things that may very well have a cultural origin, right? And so being aware of how those things kind of shape what those choices are going to look like for someone when they're identifying, and being impacted by trauma, and how that trauma gets talked about, and how we're even aware of that trauma, which actually is one of the principles as well, being aware of our trauma. Now, of course, in recovery, we do some work around that trauma, but it's also that the intersection of people with mental health issues, be it chronic, be it illness, be it just a kind of injury, and kind of having your mental health impacted. It's the intersection of mental health and trauma, is almost what's the Venn diagram of those things, are almost a circle of mental health and trauma, and so those things are really important. So I see from Yvonne, and I think that is a good point for you. Thank you for this. Everything isn't about culture. Environment can play a big part. And so I want to say that environment can very well be part of your culture, right? What spaces are you going to find yourself in can very much be due to your culture, right? And so even in that sense, maybe sometimes we can look at the way that we even define culture in that sense, but where you're going to be and who you're interacting with is significant, and it's also a manifestation of your culture. It can be. The idea that recovery is holistic. It touches every part of your life. So just like the impact touches every part of your life, just like. And so in this, I make the analogy of, kind of when we talk about the idea, especially if you are a Black person who, has a history of being born and raised as an American in the US, the idea that race impacts every part of our being, whether we acknowledge it or not, whether we talk about it or not, it shapes us. And whether we allow that to define who we are, or define what direction we go with it, how we deal with it, how we navigate with it, it impacts everything. And so in that sense, it's the idea that pretty much every identity, especially if it's one of your primary identities, is going to touch every part of your life. And so the ways in which recovery, having to be aware of how it even impacts every part. And so I did address the culture, but I feel like for me that so much of this is centered in culture, and I want to be careful when I do talk about the ways in which things may be cultural or individual, that we're not kind of making a broad generalization of how someone may be impacted based on culture, or if we go, okay, well, it's not culture, but not wanting to necessarily chalk it up as, okay, well, that person's just broken, right? From the idea, coming from the perspective of someone's lived experience of mental health challenges and receiving mental health treatment, it's also that kind of, being conscious of the multiple truths. And that's also one of the principles of recovery, talking about multiple truths, and how one truth does not automatically discount another. And so while we can center the ways that there's so many X factors that play into our worldview, and that are coming from a place of culture, and that if we might question that perhaps we can challenge ourselves to kind of examine what might, how we define culture, and why we even define culture the way we define it. So the idea of empowerment is significant. And so, and when I'm talking about all these principles, it's really the way that we try to, almost fill the void, right? If you're trying to kind of deprogram yourself from ideas and messaging that we are all getting, because we're all being inundated with the same messages, right? So which is why you don't have to be a non-Black person to be anti-Black, right? We're consuming all of this negative programming, negative messaging, just like any other community. And so that is internalized, and it manifests in thoughts, it manifests in language, it manifests in actions. And so so being aware of how we can kind of empower ourselves and just oh gosh, so wait, kind of lost my train of thought there. But anyway, so let me just move on to the others, the acceptance, which is literally what this whole presentation has been about, is the idea of what if we ask ourselves and challenge ourselves to explore the source of our own discomfort, and including, well, what is it that we might be feeling is being denied us, or, just at any level, what is the discomfort? Why, what is at the root of that? Because we as Black people know the significance of and needing white people to ask themselves these same questions, and not just white people, non-Black people, right? So even non-Black people of color, that's not one of my favorite phrases either, but when we're talking about people who aren't Black as well, but we're asking them to consider and stretch the ways in which, why they might feel uncomfortable in certain situations, or exploring that, kind of prioritizing their sense of safety or normalcy, even like why that is, why it's defined as such, and then of course connection is part of that, and which is not simply connecting with externally with other people and things. It starts with connecting with yourself, back to almost what Naisha was talking about, of the getting in touch with who that is that you are when you're not performing, when you take off the mask, when you take off the drag, when you're not performing, who are you? And connecting with yourself before you have the blueprint to connect with other people, or to ease the way to connecting with other people, and then your community, right, and your environment, and then of course peer support, which is the way that even as I show up today, speaking from my own lived experience as someone presenting female, identifying, gender fluid, but presenting female. So I have a female experience. I am also Black, and I have a Black experience. And so, and so people who, share a similar background, I'm able to speak to insight and perspectives that someone else may not be, they may be aware of, kind of in an abstract way, but the way that they understand even the unspoken aspects, or the hard to articulate aspects, is the significance of peer support. Having someone who's walked in those shoes, right, who stood in your space. And again, it doesn't affect everybody the same way. Different people can literally go experience the same thing, the same incident or event, and come away with very different experiences of that event. And yet there is something to the level of comfort and authenticity of being able to speak to someone who you don't have to start off with a whole prep and explanation before I get to talk about, and have this exchange about what our experiences are. Okay, and so then again, we're 11:56. I want to ask if there are any questions or any more feedback before I sign off. I love the edge that being a peer support practitioner gives me. Yes, yeah, because it fires me up. It energizes me. I love that I can use my experience to literally help someone else feel like they're not alone and that they're not being gaslit, right? That I'm not trying to change, I'm not trying to change your perspective because your perspective is wrong, right? Because it's not mine. It's being able to understand that we all have a perspective. We're all looking from a different point of view at the same picture and just having a different experience of it. So again, is there anybody who would like to give any final thoughts or any questions at this point? I really appreciate everybody for showing up and participating. Thank you all for participating and chatting and those brave souls who unmuted themselves to speak. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. And I hope that, so one of the things I do with Equilibrium is, I mean, and it's been such a challenge, but I'm trying to build a community for Black and non-conforming people to access peer support, to build community so that we can provide peer support for each other and just share and vicariously through each other's lived experiences. And so if you go to my website, if nothing else, if you want to give your email, your contact, so that I can contact you with when I am moving forward with the newsletters and groups and all that stuff, we can connect and support each other. But that is thank you so much for today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stacy, for today. So if you all can join me in giving Stacy a round of applause, we always love to have her here, bringing the fire and really causing us to take a step back and look at the intersections of mental health, of race, of gender. Am I echoing? Okay, of mental health, race, gender, and just how we show up as individuals for ourselves and how we show up with each other and the impact that we have. And so giving us an opportunity to choose to have a positive impact in the lives of others. So thank you so much, Stacy, for your time. Thank you for being you unapologetically. I seen someone in the chat that says next time show up as yourself, like you don't have to put on other things. So thank you for being you. Thank you for being unapologetic and speaking the truth around things that we need to do better in. And so, again, after this session, you will receive a link to the survey. If you want to hear more of these type of sessions in Intact, please let us know. Please let us know what you enjoyed, how we can improve, what you would like to hear more information on. This information is shared with our funder as well. So we want to be good stewards of our funds. And follow up with Stacy. Go to her website, book her for your sessions, for your conferences, for your summits, for your peer staff training, for your all staff training. She will bring the fire every single time. So let's support her and let's amplify the message that she is putting out into our communities and the message that's going to help us be better human beings and take better care of our families and our clients and our patients and so forth. And so thank you again, Stacy, and we'll pause here if anyone has any questions. I know we are right at the hour, but if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat, or if you would like to come off mute, raise your hand and we'll call on you. So we'll pause for a few minutes here.
And I do see from Tandra that's asking for the contact information. And so are you going to be making the slides available? I'm okay with making the slides available. They will also eventually be available on my website as well. But yes,
Yes, let me put that slide back up. And the slides will be available as well. Let me just put that up. Right, here's Stacy's contact information. And it may be easier to take a screenshot of it with your computer or with your cell phone.
Okay, good. Tandra got it. Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful and safe day. And again, be well and continue to engage in these conversations. This is just one stop that you are here today, but find opportunities to engage in this conversation with your clients, with your coworkers, within your organizational meetings, because that is the way we make change. If we keep it to ourselves, it's hard to make a change at a larger impact. And also Stacy is offering spaces to continue to have these conversations. So again, please make sure that you touch base with her. And Angelia.
Yes.
You have your hand raised? Yes.
Oh, no, I was just saying that it was very amazing, and I learned so much. And Miss Stacy, you be on point. Half the time I be saying something, I ain't want no use to me having my hand up. I'm like, that's what I'm talking about. And here have my own praise session. And I like to thank all y'all, and I appreciate all y'all keep up the good work. And I will be reaching out to you, Miss Stacy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angelia. Any additional questions? All right, so it's not now or never. You have Stacy's contact information. So if something comes up for you after you finish this call or at 2 o'clock in the morning while you sleep, don't call Stacy, but send her an email and she'll respond back to you. But we want to continue these conversations. So thank you again. If there are no questions, we will not hold time because we know how precious that is. But again, we appreciate your time and appreciate you being here today for this amazing presentation. So thank you again, Stacy, for your time, for your energy, and for your expertise. Joanne will send the link to follow for feedback in the email. So everyone will receive that link. Thank you, Joanne. All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.